something huge happened last week and nobody's talking about it for some reason. So 3 of China's 4 largest banks, which are also 3 of the 4 largest banks in the world, all of them larger than America's largest bank, JP Morgan Chase. These 3 banks stopped doing business with Russia. They halted payments going to and coming from Russia. So this creates the question, are the sanctions working? Because this was in response to the latest batch of US sanctions, which included 500 new sanctions coming in February. This comes in addition to India reducing the amount of oil it's purchasing from Russia by 35% since last year. So those are really the 2 big things that Russia was leaning on as far as things that were helping it evade the sanctions, is the reliability of doing business with China and oil demand from India. Those 2 things are potentially going away now. So some people argue that Russia and China are both collectively against the US and that Russia's in a position of strength right now. The sanctions haven't hurt them, that there's increased use of the yuan, less use of the dollar. So we're going to debunk that. This creates the question, are the sanctions actually working? How close are Russia and China? You know, in 2022, they said there was no limits to their potential relationship, their partnership against the US. Is that true? Is China doing this for their best interest, or are they doing it because they're afraid of the impact of US sanctions on their financial institutions? Because they start increasing the severity of the penalties of businesses and institutions that are still associating with Russia in any way. So here's the reason that China is still extremely fearful of the US putting sanctions on its financial institutions. You know, contrary to what a lot of people might think, people are arguing that BRICS-backed gold currency is going to potentially replace the dollar. I personally think that's laughable because look at these numbers right here of how much of a role the dollar still has in the international economy. So for foreign exchange reserves, the dollar is at over 60% of global foreign exchange reserves. That means that central banks in other countries around the world, 60% of their reserves are dollars. Pretty substantial. Now, where's China on this chart? They're going to be the next global reserve currency according to a lot of people, right? Let's see, where are they? Oh, I see them. It's that little yellow speck that's like probably 0.2% of the foreign exchange reserves held in other countries. Okay, so people are getting all worried, oh, Saudi Arabia is selling oil in yuan. They're accepting yuan as payments instead of dollars. Nobody wants the yuan. At the end of the day, what it all comes down to is trust. People need to have faith in the currency. They need to have faith that they could hold the currency, and that and the government that currency resides with isn't going to someday swoop in and take away the right to use that currency. I mean, that's what a lot of people were concerned about when the U.S. did these sanctions, because it is a pretty shitty thing the U.S. did. You know, a lot of people and institutions that had nothing to do with this war in Russia suddenly have lost their ability to use dollars in the international market. So now check this one out. So this is share of global invoicing by currency. So in America, pretty much 99% invoicing done in dollars, of course. Asia Pacific, around 75, 78%. Weird, the yuan doesn't even show up on this chart. That's how insignificant it is in Asia. Number 2 is the euro at like 5%, and then other is around 20%. So the fact that it says other instead of having the yuan as another one means that the yuan is less than 5% since the euro is 5%. And it's registering on this chart. In Europe, you have around 70% in euros, 20% in dollars, 10% in other. Then the rest of the world, dollar, 80%. Next 2 charts, percent of bank claims and liabilities by currency around the world. Claims, dollar, 60%. Liabilities, what do you know, 60%. Next highest one, the euro at around 17%. Then the yuan doesn't even register on this chart. So again, what is the substance of this argument of a gold-backed BRICS currency being the reserve currency? There's no way in hell that's going to happen. Next one, share of foreign currency debt issuance. So again, US, around 70% in dollars for foreign debt issuance. And oh, look at that. China finally registers as this little 0.1% speck. See that little yellow right there? There's the Chinese yuan or renminbi. So again, how many BRICS countries do you see on this chart? You see a little China speck. No Russia, no Brazil, no South Africa, no India. So nobody in the world has any interest in these currencies. So how is it that people think they're going to come together and create this currency that suddenly everybody wants and trusts? So it's not going to happen. And finally, an index of international currency usage by currency. So the dollar pretty steadily at 70% over the last 20 years. The next highest, the euro, has gone from like 30% to 20% over the last 20 years. British pound around 7%. Japanese yen around 5%, and look at China's little speck of the renminbi around 2%. And yeah, okay, it's crept up a little bit. That's the Saudi Arabia oil stuff people are talking about, but still extremely insignificant in the grand picture. There's no interest or demand in China's currency. So imagine it like this. It's such a basic principle, but people make it so complicated. Money comes down to trust. Who's going to trust a country that confiscates money out of your bank, doesn't let money leave the country, and you have no idea what's actually going on in the country because they don't let any information out? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not naive. I know that the dollar is slowly dying and that something has to replace it, but there's not a suitable replacer in place to replace it. I mean, yes, if you go back the history of reserve currencies, it was the British pound 100 years ago, 100 years before that, I believe it was the France franc. 100 years before that, Spain was the reserve currency holder. Then it was the Netherlands at one point, then it was the Portuguese originally. But there has to be a suitable replacer, country that's in a position of strength to take this position from us, which does not exist right now. And that's why I'm ultimately fearful of a central bank digital currency being the replacement to the dollar as the reserve currency. You know, we always talk about what the globalists are trying to do. They want a one world government, one world currency. So that is what we should be fearful about. I don't lose 1 second of sleep over a BRICS gold-backed reserve currency. That's not going to happen. That's a laughable thing that's going to happen. The amount of central banks that are currently working towards creating a central bank digital currency is 98% of global GDP. So one of the main talking points of the G20 summit, and in several countries are already instituting it. So that is something that we should be fearful of. When all these forces are behind something like that, that's what you get fearful of. So main takeaway, gold-backed BRICS currency, threat level way down here. Threat level of a CBDC way up here. So if you disagree, if you want to challenge what I'm thinking, please do. I would be happy to debate that. And until next time, I'll see you later. God bless.